Welcome to our training platform. In this video, we are still addressing the dynamics of education in the post-COVID-19 era. And we'll be looking at how education has been shaped during the COVID-19 era. We will understand that this has been a very crucial time for many educational institutions around the world. Of course, at the height of the crisis, over 1.7 billion learners around the world did not receive any form of education. And many countries attempted to come out of the lockdown. Their priority was reopening schools, giving attention to learning. And that's because it is understood that if education fails, in fact, in the upcoming decades, the consequence of that act will be more disastrous than what will arise from the COVID-19 pandemic itself. And so we see a very colossal figures that illustrates the fact that much attention should be given to education. And so it became imperative that governments around the world canvass for resumption of schools or adoption of alternative learning means that could help to keep our students, our learners active instead of completely shutting them down and making it difficult for them to continue in their process of education. And so new approaches came to the fore. Most of the suggested approaches to providing education in this time of crisis centered around the use of technology. Of course, the internet becoming one of the most preferred choices to transport the content of learning to the learners themselves. And so the second choice was using of cellular networks coupled with smartphones to allow rich multimedia experiences. And in both cases, however, countries who are less developed or poor economic nations were faced with difficult choice. And the choice we divided into population, the choice between the haves and the have-not. Of course, like you said, in most localities relating to our setting in Cross River State, many schools in Calabar were resorted to online platforms for reaching out to their learners. But in rural areas, like in other local governments, beginning from Olukwane down to Goja and all that, many schools did not implement any online means to continue to keep their students or their learners active within the time. And with this, the huge gap of learning that was created was impactful. In fact, it got to a point where when it became necessary for schools to resume, many schools looked for alternatives to transport the content that learners have missed into the learners. Many have completely left that out and they have jumped into the new session and their learning is going on. However, the knowledge gap that have existed, that have emanated through the crisis is worth giving attention to. And so the real challenge has been developing of quality materials that could provide viable substitute for face-to-face experience. In fact, traditional teachers have never been trained in developing materials that require for non-face-to-face delivery, and vast majority are not aware of the huge collection of open educational resources available in the digital world. So, however, in these difficult circumstances, one aspect of human nature that has shone brilliantly has been resilience displayed by all players. From the early responses and to setting up of coalitions that led to many opting for other options like raising online platforms where their learners can key into and then see how the content delivered to their homes. They can also do their assessments and then submit back to the school. Many have resorted into recording these lessons, and then parents can only come with a flash drive, or a laptop, or a phone and copy this content in videos, go back home and play for their children to watch, and so they can still have a feel of these deliveries. In fact, that is one of the means that we have recommended for our local communities to adopt, instead of simply throwing away all the content that was built for third term of last session altogether and creating that huge knowledge gap. It will be essential for them to adopt this simple strategy. Have teachers record short sessions of their lesson deliveries into videos, then they could upload them and give to parents who will allow their children to watch them, and they can also do some exercises and return back to the school. In that way, the huge gap of knowledge that have been created can gradually be filled. So, as the multitude of solutions are implemented, mostly dictated by local circumstances, what is obvious is that a different world of education is slowly unfolding. That means schools with younger children have smaller classes with high level of attention, and then we also have hygiene becoming a very prominent part of schools. And so all of this, like we know, would trigger a provision of adequate funding for schools, especially from the angle of government. And so looking at this, what are some of the dynamics that this COVID-19 have placed on education? Of course, there are basically 4 changes that we have noted, adjustment that will prospectively to the future generations. For a while now, educators around the world have been talking about the need to rethink and revamp education. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic afforded them opportunity to pause for a moment, use the time that learners stayed at home, about 6 months, to restructure education. Many countries have done so. Our fear is that in Nigeria, we are still hoping that education administrators will find time to revamp the educational system and see possible ways to introduce alternative, even while the mainstream education system is going on, to rethink alternatives to the digital world where content can be effectively transported to our young ones. So we'll understand that the generation we are living now is called the Generation Z. The Generation Z is a generation where the oldest is about 25 years old, and it's the generation of the digital world, where everything that they know is using the digital world. They are a generation that cannot do without the social media for a day, or through the international web for a day. And so in such a generation, we can understand what their aspirations and their anxieties will be with the shutdown of educational institutions for many, many months. Of course, who are the Generation Z? They are the generation that were born and grown in a world that is truly globalized, where there is no distance to one another, where they can reach anyone, anywhere around the world by just a click of the button. And so their aspirations are really fast. Their yearnings, their challenges are quite fast-paced. And so how has education been affected, and what prospects for the future? There are 4 basic ways, like we said earlier, that this has occurred. One is that educating citizens is in an interconnected world. Educating citizens in an interconnected world. COVID-19 is a pandemic that illustrated how globally interconnected all of us are. And so there's no longer a thing as an isolated person, isolated issues, or isolated actions. All issues are globalized. All actions are globalized. And so successive people in the coming decades need to be able to understand the interrelatedness and navigate across boundaries to leverage their differences and work in a globalized collaboration to define education as we move forward. The second way education has been shaped is redefining the role of the educator. Of course, the notion that knowledge is the inherent in the educator, in the teacher, is no longer holding water as it is. Why? Because the 21st century, with students being able to gain access to knowledge, even learn a technical skill through a few clicks of the phone, tablets, or computers, we will need to redefine the role of a teacher as simply a guidance in the educational learning process. This will mean that the role of a teacher will move towards facilitating young people's development, to contributing members of the society, to directing them. So the resilience and adaptability will be crucial for the next generations that will follow. Teaching life skills needed for the future generations. In this ever-changing global environment, what is most important now is allowing our students to gain life skills. It's not about infusing head knowledge into them to the extent where they know all that is expected, but can hardly use it in any way possible within the society. Rather, looking into the future, some of the most important skills that employers will be looking at is creativity, communication and collaboration, alongside empathy and then emotional intelligence, and being able to work across demographic lines of differences to harness the power of the collective through effective teamwork. And so such qualities as creativity, communication and collaboration, empathy, emotional intelligence, and then being able to work within a team are crucial qualities that will be expected. And in the decades to come, much of the work as roles that our young generation will face then is yet unknown. And so they need to be equipped now with life skills that will ensure that they meet up with these challenges when they do appear on the world scene. And then we also have unlocking technology to deliver education. We need to unlock technology. We need to use alternative means of technology to facilitate education. So we will not rely basically on face-to-face lesson delivery anymore or classroom management system. We need to look for opportunities to leverage on technology and to disseminate or to transfer content and then get feedback also from learners without converging on classroom. In fact, after the COVID-19 pandemic, many institutions have broken down their school sessions into parts and then observing the physical distances rule. And so that would mean that the knowledge gap that has been created, there should be a means of filling that knowledge gap. And one platform that will be essential is using the digital world. Of course, our fear or reservation is in rural areas where technology is limited, network is limited, and so because of that, it becomes very difficult for them to leverage on the digital world to transport education. But one thing that could still be done is using recordings and uploading them for those who have the abilities to watch them through their smartphones, to their laptops, or other devices. So, of course, this is very essential for all teachers and school administrators. These four basic areas that we have recounted, that education is basically shaped for the future. We would like to reenact them in this video. The first one is educating citizens in an interconnected world. No problem is now isolated, no action is isolated. Every problem and action has been globalized. Redefining the role of a teacher. A teacher is no more seen as the masterminder of information, but also just as a guidance in driving skills that learners need to face situations that will arise in the decades to come, and then teaching life skills needed for the future, of course, and then unlocking technology to deliver education. So thank you very much for being part of this video. We'd like you to join us in the next video as we look at other dynamics that education has been subjected to by means of the COVID-19 pandemic.